History has crowned many kings. It has praised conquerors, emperors, and builders of empires. But wealth, true, unimaginable wealth, has rarely been measured honestly. When modern lists attempt to rank the richest people of all time, familiar names appear: Rockefeller, Carnegie, Bezos, Musk. Their fortunes are tallied in billions, sometimes trillions, adjusted for inflation. But then, standing alone, almost awkwardly, almost inconveniently, there is one name that breaks the scale entirely: Mansa Musa. A king so wealthy that historians stop using numbers when they describe him. A ruler whose fortune was not counted, but felt, in markets collapsing, in cities reshaped, in gold flowing like water across continents. This is not exaggeration. This is not legend inflated by time. This is documented history. Mansa Musa ruled the Mali Empire in the 14th century, at a time when Europe was fractured, impoverished, and still clawing its way out of the Dark Ages. While much of the world struggled to accumulate gold, Mali sat atop it, controlling the richest gold fields on earth. And Mansa Musa did not merely inherit this wealth, he unleashed it. In a single journey, he destabilized entire economies. In a single reign, he turned a West African empire into the most talked-about civilization on the planet. Kings trembled at his arrival. Merchants reshaped their routes because of him. Scholars, architects, and chroniclers followed in his wake. Yet, despite all of this, despite being arguably the richest human being to ever live, his story remains faint in modern memory. Why? Because Mansa Musa ruled Africa. And African greatness was never meant to be remembered. This documentary is not about mythologizing the past. It is about restoring perspective. Because before colonization, before exploitation, before the narrative of absence, Africa produced empires of staggering sophistication, and Mansa Musa stood at their pinnacle. To understand him, we must begin not with gold, but with silence, a silence that swallowed his name for centuries. A silence that history is only now beginning to break. Long before Mansa Musa was born, West Africa was already wealthy, not marginally wealthy, not regionally wealthy, but globally indispensable. For centuries, the world's gold flowed from Africa, not Europe, not Asia, Africa, and at the heart of that flow stood the lands that would become the Mali Empire. Beneath the soil of West Africa lay immense gold deposits, Bambouk, Bure, and later Galam, fields so rich they supplied much of the Old World's gold. Islamic dynasties minted coins from it. European monarchs hungered for it. Mediterranean merchants crossed deserts to reach it. But gold alone does not create an empire. Organization does. Before Mali, the Ghana Empire had already mastered trans-Saharan trade, controlling salt, gold, and taxation routes with precision. When Ghana declined, its successor did not emerge from chaos, but from continuity. Mali rose as a refinement of what came before. At its center was the Niger River, Africa's great artery, feeding agriculture, trade, and urban life. Cities like Niani, Gao, and later Timbuktu were not villages or camps. They were administrative hubs, intellectual centers, and commercial powerhouses. By the time Musa's ancestors ruled, Mali was already a titan. Gold moved north, salt moved south. Ivory, cola nuts, textiles, and enslaved labor flowed across borders. Every caravan paid tribute, every merchant respected Malian authority. And at the top of this system sat the Mansa. Not merely a king, but a sacred ruler, bound to the land, the people, and the divine. Wealth in Mali was not hoarded randomly. It was regulated, measured, taxed. Gold nuggets belonged to the state. Gold dust circulated as currency. This distinction alone stabilized Mali's economy in ways medieval Europe could not comprehend. This was the world Mansa Musa inherited. Not a poor backwater, not an emerging kingdom, but a fully formed economic superpower, waiting for a ruler bold enough to display it to the world. Mansa Musa did not seize the throne through conquest. He inherited it through mystery. The story begins with his predecessor, Abu Bakr II, an emperor obsessed not with gold, but with the ocean. According to Malian tradition, Abu Bakr believed land lay beyond the Atlantic horizon. Against all counsel, he abdicated the throne, assembled a massive fleet, and sailed west, never to return. And so, power fell to Musa. At the time, Musa was not a general, not a conqueror, not a celebrity. He was a deputy ruler, quiet, observant, deeply educated. Where other kings proved strength through warfare, Musa proved it through restraint. Where others expanded borders, he fortified systems. And this distinction mattered. Musa ascended the throne around 1312 CE, inheriting a stable empire, but one that had never been tested on the global stage. Mali was wealthy, but unknown beyond Africa and the Islamic world. That would change. Musa was a devout Muslim, deeply committed to Islamic scholarship and law. But unlike many rulers, his faith did not isolate him. It connected him. Islam in Mali was not forced, it was layered. Indigenous traditions coexisted with Islamic governance. Scholars debated, judges ruled, mosques rose beside ancestral customs. Musa understood that religion was also diplomacy. And he saw an opportunity that no Malian ruler before him had dared to attempt. The Hajj. The pilgrimage to Mecca was a religious duty, but it was also a political declaration. It announced one's presence to the entire Islamic world. Musa would not go quietly. He would go in a way the world could not ignore. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out for Mecca. What followed would become one of the most astonishing journeys in recorded history. His caravan reportedly included 60,000 people, officials, soldiers, servants, scholars, and slaves. Among them were 12,000 enslaved attendants, each carrying gold staffs weighing several pounds. Behind them marched camels, hundreds of them, each loaded with gold dust. Some sources estimate over 100 tons of gold traveled with Musa. This was not excess, it was strategy. As Musa crossed the Sahara, he distributed gold generously, too generously. In Cairo, he gave so much gold to merchants, scholars, and the poor that the value of gold collapsed. The price of gold remained depressed in Egypt for over a decade. Let that sink in. A single man's generosity destabilized one of the most powerful economies of the medieval world. Egyptian officials were stunned. Chroniclers rushed to record his presence. Artists sketched him. Rumors raced ahead of his caravan. Who was this African king? Where did this wealth come from? How vast was his empire? Musa did not boast. He did not threaten. He simply gave. And in doing so, he demonstrated a truth the world could not ignore. Mali was not peripheral, it was central. By the time Musa reached Mecca, his name was already legend. News of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage reached Europe not through rumor, but through maps. In 1375, decades after Musa's death, the Catalan atlas depicted him seated on a golden throne holding a massive gold nugget. This was not symbolic art, it was geopolitical recognition. Europe now knew where gold came from and who controlled it. This image terrified and fascinated European powers. Mali appeared not as a land to conquer, but as a civilization beyond their reach. Yet Europe would remember, and one day it would return. But for now, Mansa Musa ruled at the height of his power. Wealth unmatched, prestige unchallenged, and a vision that extended far beyond gold. Because what Musa did next would define his true legacy, not as the richest man in history, but as one of its greatest builders. For centuries, the name Timbuktu has been used as a metaphor, a distant place, an unreachable place, a place that might not even exist. But in the 14th century, Timbuktu was not a metaphor. It was a magnet. When Mansa Musa returned from Mecca, he did not come back empty-handed. He brought with him architects, scholars, jurists, and engineers from across the Islamic world, men trained in Cairo, Mecca, Andalusia, and beyond. And he brought them to Timbuktu. At the time, Timbuktu sat at the edge of the Sahara, where desert met river, where caravans unloaded gold, salt, and books. It was already important. Musa made it indispensable. Under his patronage, Timbuktu transformed into one of the world's great intellectual capitals. Mosques were not simply places of worship, they were universities. Libraries multiplied, manuscripts arrived by the thousands. The most famous of Musa's architectural commissions was the Jingwareba Mosque, designed by Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, an Andalusian architect Musa met during the pilgrimage. Built of mud brick, timber and stone, it was not primitive, it was engineered to endure the Sahel's brutal climate. This was not symbolism, this was infrastructure. Education in Timbuktu was not restricted to elites. Scholars debated astronomy, mathematics, medicine, theology, law, and geography. Degrees were awarded. Intellectual reputations mattered more than bloodlines. At its height, Timbuktu housed hundreds of schools and tens of thousands of students. And here is the detail history often buries. Books were more valuable than gold. Manuscripts were traded, inherited, copied and guarded. Private libraries held thousands of volumes. Knowledge was currency. While much of Europe struggled with widespread illiteracy, West Africa was cultivating scholars whose works would influence Islamic thought for centuries. This is not romanticism. Surviving manuscripts prove it, and Mansa Musa paid for it all. Mansa Musa's fortune did not come from recklessness. It came from control. Unlike European kings who taxed peasants to exhaustion, Musa ruled over an economy built on trade monopolies, regulation, and logistics. Mali did not merely possess gold, it controlled how gold entered the world. Gold mines were state property. Unauthorized extraction was forbidden. Trade routes were protected by imperial soldiers. Markets were regulated. Weights and measures were standardized. Salt, nearly as valuable as gold in the medieval world, was transported south from the Sahara in massive slabs. Mali controlled its taxation. Every transaction enriched the state. Musa understood something few rulers did. Wealth must circulate, but never escape control. This is why his generosity on pilgrimage shocked economists of his time. It violated every known rule of medieval finance. And yet, Mali did not collapse. Because the system was deeper than a single journey. Musa appointed governors, judges, and administrators based on competence, not lineage alone. Provinces paid tribute but retained local autonomy. This reduced rebellion and increased productivity. Military power existed, but it was not the empire's foundation. Mali expanded through diplomacy as often as conquest. Even enslaved labor, brutal as it was, functioned within a regulated system rather than unchecked raiding. This does not excuse it, but it explains the empire's stability. Musa ruled less like a medieval warlord and more like a centralized state architect. That is why his wealth endured. Mansa Musa spoke many languages. But gold was the one everyone understood. During and after his pilgrimage, Musa used gold as diplomacy. He funded mosques in foreign cities. He supported scholars abroad. He built relationships not through treaties, but through generosity that could not be ignored. This was soft power centuries before the term existed. In Cairo, officials scrambled to host him properly. In Mecca, his presence elevated Mali's status overnight. In Medina, scholars debated the nature of his empire. Suddenly, Africa was not a rumor, it was a participant. European merchants took notice. Mediterranean traders began tracing caravan routes south. Cartographers revised their maps. Kings began to ask dangerous questions. Where does this gold come from? How far south must one go to reach it? Who guards it? These questions would echo for centuries. Musa never intended conquest. But his wealth rewired global curiosity. And curiosity has consequences. But wealth has a paradox. The more visible it becomes, the more fragile it grows. Musa's pilgrimage exposed Mali to the world. But it also exposed Mali to the world. Foreign interest increased. Trade intensified. External influence crept inward. Internally, Musa's successors lacked his restraint. Some overspent. Others neglected governance. Regional rulers tested boundaries. The empire remained rich, but cracks began to form. This is the danger of peak power. It convinces leaders that decline is impossible. Musa himself ruled wisely until his death around 1337. But no system, no matter how strong, survives without capable stewardship. The gold remained. The discipline did not. Long after Mansa Musa's death, his image remained frozen in European imagination. A black king, a throne of gold, a land of infinite wealth. By the time European explorers began pushing south along the African coast in the 15th century, they were not searching blindly. They were chasing Musa's shadow. Portugal's voyages were not driven by curiosity alone, but by economics. They wanted gold without intermediaries. They wanted direct access. They wanted Mali, but the empire they encountered was no longer at its height. And history, as it often does, mistook decline for absence. The memory of Mansa Musa faded, not because he was insignificant, but because his existence contradicted a story Europe needed to tell. A story where Africa had no past worth remembering. Empires rarely collapse in fire, they erode. After Mansa Musa's death in 1337, the Mali Empire did not fall overnight. There was no single battle, no dramatic invasion that shattered its foundations. Instead, the slow work of fragmentation began. Musa's immediate successor, his son Magan I, inherited the throne, but not the discipline. Contemporary accounts suggest extravagance without restraint. Court politics intensified. Provincial governors, once tightly managed, began asserting greater autonomy. The problem was not poverty. Mali was still wealthy. The problem was cohesion. Trade routes began shifting. Rival states, such as Songhai, tested Mali's military reach. Tuareg nomads pushed into Timbuktu. Regions that once paid tribute now delayed or resisted. Gold still flowed, but not as predictably, and the outside world was watching. North African chroniclers, who once wrote of Musa with awe, now recorded instability. Mali did not disappear, but it weakened. And here lies a crucial truth. Mali's decline did not mean Africa's decline. The Songhai Empire would rise. Hausa city-states would flourish. Benin would expand. Ethiopia would endure. But European observers did not see continuity. They saw opportunity. By the 15th century, Europe was changing. the Renaissance stirred. Maritime technology improved. Portugal, small but ambitious, began sailing south along the West African coast. Officially, these voyages were framed as exploration. Unofficially, they were economic missions. European powers knew about Mali's gold. The Catalan Atlas had preserved Musa's image for decades. Merchant rumors confirmed West Africa's wealth. But trans-Saharan trade routes were controlled by Muslim intermediaries. Gold flowed north into North Africa before reaching Europe. Portugal wanted to bypass them. They wanted direct access. So they sailed. When Portuguese ships reached the gold-rich regions of the West African coast, they did not find Mansa Musa's Mali at its peak. They found fragmented polities, regional rulers negotiating power. And where centralized authority weakens, foreign leverage increases. What began as trade soon evolved into fortified outposts. What began as exchange would eventually become exploitation. But this did not happen because Africa was empty. It happened because Africa was rich. The shadow of Musa's wealth lingered over every Portuguese calculation. As European influence expanded, something subtle began to change: the narrative. In early European maps, Africa had been drawn with kings and cities. Musa himself appeared holding gold. Timbuktu was labeled as a center of learning. But as the Atlantic slave trade intensified and colonization loomed, depictions shifted. Africa became vague, blank, undefined. Why? Because it is easier to exploit a land that has no history. Acknowledging Mansa Musa meant acknowledging African statecraft, wealth, intellectual life, and global influence. It meant admitting that centuries before European expansion, West Africa had built complex systems rivaling any in the medieval world. That acknowledgement complicated the moral justification of empire. So gradually, subtly, the story was reframed. Timbuktu became myth rather than metropolis. Manuscripts were ignored, oral histories were dismissed as folklore rather than archives. Musa transformed from historical figure into exaggeration. The richest man ever. Surely that was legend. But it was not legend. It was discomfort. Despite centuries of distortion, something survived: paper. Hidden in trunks, buried in walls, passed down through families in Timbuktu and beyond, tens of thousands of manuscripts endured. Texts on astronomy, legal opinions, poetry, medical treatises, commercial contracts. These documents did not describe a primitive society. They described a literate, interconnected, intellectual world. Many were written during or after Musa's reign, funded by the educational institutions he strengthened. When modern scholars rediscovered these collections in the 20th and 21st centuries, it forced a reckoning. Mali was not peripheral, it had been central. The survival of these manuscripts is more than historical trivia. It is evidence, physical, undeniable evidence, that Africa's intellectual traditions were systematic and sophisticated. Musa's greatest legacy may not have been gold, it may have been preservation. Modern economists have tried. Some attempt inflation adjustments. Others estimate the value of Mali's gold reserves during Musa's reign. Figures spiral into the hundreds of billions. Some calculations push toward trillions. But every serious historian eventually admits the same thing. Mansa Musa's wealth is incalculable. Not because we lack math, but because his empire controlled the supply of the world's most valuable resource at a time when gold defined power itself. He did not simply own mines. He influenced markets. He reshaped economies. He destabilized currency values across regions. And wealth in the 14th century was not diversified through stocks or global portfolios. It was tangible, physical, strategic. Measured against the scale of his time, Musa stands unmatched. But here is the deeper question. Was wealth his true achievement, or was it what he did with it? He built. He educated. He connected continents. He altered maps. And he forced the world to acknowledge Africa's presence, even if later centuries tried to forget. In the modern world, wealth is abstract. Numbers flicker across screens. Fortunes rise and fall in milliseconds. Currency is backed not by metal, but by confidence. But in the 14th century, gold was not symbolic. Gold was power. It minted armies. It built cities. It stabilized kingdoms. It commanded loyalty. And Mansa Musa did not merely possess gold, he governed the world's largest known supply of it. At the height of Mali's dominance, West Africa may have accounted for nearly half of the old world's gold production. That meant something extraordinary. The economic stability of entire regions depended indirectly on Malian output. This is why Musa's pilgrimage was so disruptive. When he distributed gold in Cairo, he did not simply appear generous. He altered supply. He distorted value. He unintentionally caused inflation that lasted more than a decade. Few individuals in history have had that level of economic impact without declaring war. Consider this carefully. Modern billionaires influence markets through corporations. Musa influenced markets through presence. He was not the richest man by accumulation alone. He was the richest man by leverage. And yet, he did not weaponize his wealth for conquest. He did not attempt Mediterranean domination. He did not invade Europe. Instead, he invested in architecture, education, religion, and infrastructure. In an era where kings measured greatness in territory seized, Musa measured it in institutions built. That distinction may be the most radical part of his legacy. There is a temptation, especially in the modern age, to dismiss stories like Musa's as exaggeration. 60,000 people in a caravan, hundreds of camels loaded with gold, an emperor so wealthy he crashed economies. Surely that sounds embellished. But the remarkable thing is this. The accounts come not from Malian self-praise, but from external observers. Arab historians such as Al-Umari documented detailed interviews with people who met Musa in Cairo. Ibn Battuta later traveled through Mali and confirmed its wealth and administrative sophistication. European cartographers depicted him decades later. independent sources converge. Are the numbers precise? Probably not. Medieval chroniclers often rounded upward for drama, but even conservative estimates confirm staggering scale. And perhaps the greatest evidence is indirect. If Musa had not been extraordinary, Europe would not have remembered him for over a century after his death. Maps do not immortalize minor rulers, they immortalize power. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Mansa Musa's story faded not because it lacked importance, but because it challenged narratives that would later dominate global history. When European colonial expansion accelerated in the 18th and 19th centuries, Africa was increasingly portrayed as a continent without advanced political systems prior to European contact. This narrative justified conquest. But Mansa Musa complicated that story. He proved that centuries before colonization, West Africa produced centralized governance, global diplomacy, economic dominance, and intellectual achievement. So his name slipped into footnotes. Timbuktu became a punchline rather than a university city. The Mali Empire became a paragraph rather than a chapter. It was not that evidence disappeared, it was that emphasis shifted. And history, as always, reflects power. Only in recent decades has scholarship begun restoring Musa to his rightful scale, not as folklore, not as romanticism, but as documented reality. Many rulers were wealthy, many rulers were devout, many rulers built cities, but what made Mansa Musa singular was convergence. He ruled at the precise moment when West African gold was globally essential, trans-Saharan trade networks were mature. The Islamic world was intellectually interconnected. European maritime ambition was awakening. He stood at the crossroads of continents, and he understood symbolism. His pilgrimage was not required to maintain power at home. It was a statement to the world. Mali is here. Mali is organized. Mali is wealthy beyond comparison. But after announcing himself so loudly, Musa returned home and did something quieter and more lasting. He institutionalized knowledge. He ensured that Timbuktu would outlive him. We often remember conquerors because they destroy. We should remember Musa because he constructed. So was Mansa Musa truly the richest man in history? If wealth is measured in relative economic control, global resource dominance, and purchasing power within one's era, the answer is almost certainly yes. But that may not be the most important conclusion. Because wealth fades, empires fracture, gold disperses. What endures is impact. Mansa Musa reshaped global awareness of Africa. He altered trade psychology. He invested in education systems whose manuscripts still survive. He built structures that still stand. He demonstrated that African leadership in the medieval era was neither accidental nor peripheral. He forced the world to acknowledge Africa's presence. even if later centuries tried to forget. And perhaps that is the real measure of his riches. Not how much gold he held, but how much gravity he commanded. History has crowned conquerors with louder legends. It has celebrated emperors with larger armies. But few individuals have bent the global economy simply by traveling across it. Few have left an imprint on maps decades after their death. Few have controlled the very metal that defined power itself. Mansa Musa did. The richest man in history was not a Wall Street titan, not an oil magnate, not a tech billionaire. He was a 14th century African emperor who understood something timeless. Wealth is not merely possession, it is influence. And influence, when used wisely, echoes across centuries, even when the world tries to silence it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new discovery. Share your thoughts in the comments and join us as we explore history without borders.